in all the work I've done in ESG, I discovered something, is that sustainability is the balance between current generations and future generations. If we don't find a way to decorrelate economic growth and the production of waste, economic growth will stop. My biggest secret weapon is I want 15,000 people to reinvent the way they think about value. If that's done, I think it will be phenomenal.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to our last session of the Learning from Leaders series of the year. Today, as part of your Business Immersion Week, we have the pleasure to welcome a countryman of mine, Françoise Faelli, partner and director at Bain Company. And as always, to join me in these sessions of Learning from Leader, I'm happy to see Peter Van Am. Hello, Peter. Good afternoon. How are you?
Well, hello to you and hello to everybody. I am absolutely great because I'm here in Geneva and the weather is beautiful. And you know, what better way to start the weekend than to have our last Learning from Leaders session of the year with Françoise Faelli. This is also very special for me, I have to say, look, because François is many things. And among those things, he is my former boss. This is true. I started my career at Bain Company, the consulting firm where he is now a global managing partner. I never made it that far. But today, I get to ask the questions, which is very exciting to me. So welcome to you, François. François, you are global managing partner at Bain Company, a global consulting firm, you know, world renowned for advising the largest company in the world. You know, famous, you know, for being sort of like the strategy consultants, you know, the people who come in and sort of take charge. And you are a global managing partner in the field of ESG. Now, I've got a lot of questions for you, and I think the students have a lot of questions for you too. And the first question, François, is what does that actually mean to be global managing partner at Bain for ESG?
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to see you, Peter. So what does that mean? The title doesn't mean anything. It was made up by my marketing partner.
Excellent.
It's clear. But I guess what's my job? ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. It's one of the ways people describe what others talk about is sustainability, and it covers themes, of course, that are interlinked. How you manage the environment and how you treat people is completely and forever linked. I can talk about that. I think Bain realized, like many other institutions, that there needed to be somebody in charge. And my job, I sit at Bain's management committee, and my job is threefold. One is I need to develop our specific offers for ESG. For example, students would be interested. There are many companies who want to decarbonize their firm.
Right.
Well, the consulting offer to help do that. So
right.
That's
because you have to figure out, of course, as a big company, you know, where are my emissions, my carbon emissions? I've got sites all over the world. I've got my own emissions. I'm buying electricity or energy, and I've got my suppliers. It's, you know, thousands, maybe millions of data points. And of course, to know how to get started on that, you might as well get in some external help, and Bain would be providing that help.
Yeah, and I think that you nailed it, Peter. I think the first problem is to know what's your footprint. The second problem is, do you commit, or what do you commit, by when? And the third one, where most companies are right now, is how do I deliver?
Right.
I can come back to that. The other two jobs, very quickly, is that there is no, and I think my students, at least in Belgium, are very interested and pleased to hear that, is that when Bain now does a project of strategy, or when Bain now does a project of supply chain, we need ESG or sustainability to become one of the dimensions you look at. So my second job,
why is that? Why is now ESG sustainability a part of everything?
But well, let me start by a couple of examples. I'm still a consultant. I'm advising CEOs, and I'm doing at the moment in parallel 3 10-year plans for 3 companies. One of them is a food producer. Well, if you project a food company in 10 years, you're up against very severe regulation, packaging, methane emission if you're anything to do with dairy.
Right.
Before you plan another 10 years of unlimited growth, you'd better figure out if you have a way to compensate your emission.
Right.
If you don't, you're going to run into trouble. The question I ask CEOs, and then I'll let you ask more questions, is if you're a business, what would be the price humanity has to pay for you to double your business?
You asked that question.
Yeah, an hour ago already. Yeah.
And so you come in today as consultant, and you ask this very, very heavy question that is not about the business as such, but that is about the future of humanity more than anything.
This is the link. This is also why I think we are all here, because I'm doing a tiny bit of this, but the job of future business leaders, and I have currently 94 on this,
that's right,
web, to be able to merge the way business thrive economically with finding out a way that the planet or the people don't have to suffer for it.
right.
We are in a period of exponential use of resources. If we don't figure this out, it will crack, either because the planet will become unlivable, or because there will not be enough stuff to make the stuff we want to make. So
that's right.
This is where we need to embed it into everything we do.
I mean, it's very heartening, I think, for many of us to hear that, because it's not, I think, everyone's impression of the business world. And so I should ask you, has it always been like that? You've got, a few decades of experience. Was it always that business was thinking about its broader impact? No.
No. So you have to confess that it's not the case. But I want also the people here on this WebEx to be comfortable with that, because sustainability was first, the term was first coined in 87. But the real work on sustainability, the real, I hope you are familiar with planetary boundaries here, because if you're not, I'm happy to explain.
With the idea of planetary boundaries, the fact that, we have to, there's limits to how we can grow and how far, okay.
This is a small 10-year-old. And so the generation of people who have to embed this in the work is us. I'm slightly older than
yes.
you.
Yes.
Our job. So no, it's fairly new. In the 60s, Milton Friedman developed a theory that had nothing to do with embedding ESG.
Milton Friedman. Now you gotta, listen, I love that you mentioned Milton Friedman, but I have to admit, I may have looked into that name, but maybe our students have not. So we have to explain now, this is about the idea of the big ideas of economics, right? And the big idea of economics, they change over time. And of course, before anyone here in the seminar was born, there was a man called Milton Friedman.
Right.
And that man is important because he was a very influential economist and in the United States. And he came up with the idea essentially of what we know today as free market capitalism. And basically the purpose of business is just business, is making profits. So that idea wasn't always there, right? No. But it did become dominant in the time that, you came, when you were the age of our students, that was the idea that you got taught in school. And when you started consulting, that was the thing that you had to optimize, profits.
Yeah.
And that changed.
And the world changed. I think everybody in this, we are 101 now. Everybody knows the world changed. And that's, it's not easy. And what I'm not pretending to students here is that it's not easy to reconcile. Sometimes it's a win-win. Sometimes you do, the Unilever CEO, Paul Polman, one CEO of Unilever has this.
He was here on Learning from Leaders.
Even better, you do good and you do well and you do good. But it's not always like that. There are real trade-offs for some of my clients, and it's not easy. But my job for Bain is to make sure that when a Bainee, as we call them,
Yes.
talks about a supply chain project. This supply chain project doesn't only optimize lead times or cost, but it also takes care of carbon.
Right. Now that's become table stakes. You have to do that. And you explained why. The world has changed, thinking has changed, regulation has changed, you said. Now, François, I mean, you are the leader. You're the global managing partner for ESG at Bain. Are you the kind of person who is, you know, on the weekends, you go to demonstrate with Greta Thunberg? Or not? Are you just like, listen, we don't all need to be Greta Thunberg. We need to do what needs to be done at the time that it needs to be done, and I'm a little bit more pragmatic about it.
No, you're raising important questions. I think, first of all, individually, and we all have to figure out our own footprint, right? I'm not going to get into that, but I've done a lot. Forget demonstration for this first point. Is you have to just discuss with yourself and your family and your friends, your significant other, if you eat meat, how much meat, which meat, if you take flights, how many flights, and everybody has to. I never judge that, but I think it's the first step of.
Okay, so you do find that there is a moral dimension to it too, beyond the regulation, beyond sort of the rules of business have changed.
Every human now has, especially in all countries, in countries in Europe and in the US, has a question about personal footprint. The second one is, then there is a question of impact on others. On this one, my answer is not Greta Thunberg's answer. My answer for myself is that the best way I can have impact is to work through Bain. Why? Because Bain has 50,000 employees, and that's my job number 3, is to upskill them on ESG. But 15,000 employees, they aren't mine, or 15,000 employees are spectacular young people. If I can even inspire them to do a little bit more, and then I go through my clients.
To your clients, and they're all the world's corporates.
But there is a term in sustainability called an anchor firm. An anchor firm is a firm that, because of its size and influence, is granted more expectations to change the world. Take an example. Apple can influence billions of consumers, can influence billions of suppliers. And if Apple decides to do the right things for the world, it has an anchor influence into millions of lives.
Right.
So I'm going to go into Apple's ESG strategy because I'm not familiar with this. But there are about, according to Oxfam, 500 to 2,000 of these companies that have, if you want, the biggest influence. And I'll say one more thing that would be interesting for us all here. When you ask citizens who they trust the most, there is a trust index, the name of the person.
Yeah, Edelman.
Exactly. Thank you. When the trust is high in NGOs, but there is an understanding that their power is not huge. There is a problem of trust with governments and public.
Yeah. And business is sort of like the employees put a lot of trust in their companies. So that is the possible lever for change. And you're working with that lever for change. Now you're, hands-on, you're working with some of the largest companies. So you're well placed to sort of say, are we on the right track? Because I think a lot of people wonder about that. When it comes to climate, are we actually on the right track to get where we need to get? And with need to get, I mean, where the United Nations has said a few years ago, we would like to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Are the actions of companies in line with that ambition?
Oh, the data is very clear on that. Is if you take the average company, very few have made what you call sometimes SBTI commitments.
This is sort of the to put targets. The acronym means science-based targets. So very few companies have put targets in terms of emissions that science says are in line with limiting global warming. So that's a reality. But François,
the portion of big firms who have done this is higher. So part of my job is to convince them to put a higher target. But let's face it, and I don't want to lie to students, there is a first step, which is to take the target there is a second step to reach it. And there are many companies for which the technologies to reach the commitments are not yet either existing or affordable. And so there is a lot more work to do. And
right. Now, where does that leave us? Because, you know, you're doing this work, right? And hopefully you find the motivation to keep on doing this work for another few years. And of course, the students that are with us today, well, they got to find the motivation to do this kind of work for the next 40 years or 50 years. Are you hopeful, without being naive, are you hopeful that we're going to get on track with what you see at the work at the companies that you do?
I think I'm the hopeful type. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I have one straight advice first of all, I think the role of business leaders like the one I talk to, and there are a few more people joining all the time, it's going to be more interesting and more important than when I was a student. Because with the education you have now, you have a power to literally change the world, and the world is changing.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that I worry about is the people, the scientists who have modeled the way we solve all these climate crises and other crises rely on regulation, changes behaviors, and technologies.
Right. Regulation, we're going to go over those. Regulation, changed behaviors, and technology, right? Behavior, that's up to all of us, right? Regulation, it is coming, or it's already there. You know, you see that in Europe and the US, the regulation is entering. And then there's technology. And you said, what I see right now is that some of the technologies are not yet there.
No, I worry when people, and unfortunately I meet too many of these people, just trust that technology will solve it all. The quote would be, we've always solved this through technology people. And this is really this is really dangerous, because this will, I don't think, materialize. I'm working with the MIT. They have a model, and technology alone doesn't solve it. So the scientists are saying it's not true. And then there is something dangerous societally that I think will take us off chart, Peter. If we all rely on 15 billionaires or trillionaires who will solve the world through technology, I think there is even...
Right. There's a dependency there, which is too risky.
Issue with democracy.
François, it's fascinating to hear you talk about these things. And clearly, you know, these are sort of the insights that you've developed throughout your career as a consultant. So now I'm curious to know, were you always certain when you were 20 years old? Did you already know this is what I want to do? Become global managing partner, ESG at Bain?
So of course, this completely nonsensical.
It doesn't make sense, because ESG didn't exist. And Bain probably didn't even have a global managing partner.
But it started at university, and I did more work in the social area. But I've been always convinced that this needed sorted out. And when I was 21-year-old, I did work on the link between social norms and global trade, because already.
So you always had that sort of inkling to be working on social. But of course, at some point you need to make a decision about your future, your professional future, and that's what I'm getting at. I'm wondering. I'm shifting gears here a little bit in our conversation, because I'm wondering, a lot of these the students that are with us today, in the next months, weeks, years, they're going to have to make a decision about what they're going to do with their careers. And I wonder if you, based on your experience, if you go back in time to when you were 22, did you know, I want to work for Bain?
Not for Bain. So I'm going to answer your question straight, and it's embarrassing in two ways. The first one is, why Bain? I had no idea. And it was literally because I was at the university and the Bain folks were
presenting
offering a drink, and I went there. I didn't know Bain. I just entered the room and met some cool people, but I had no plans to join Bain.
So this is good, because the students with us today, they're also meeting somebody cool from Bain. So maybe, the same will happen to them.
But the consulting thing is even more embarrassing. Is my mother asked me when I was 10, 12, if I wanted what I wanted to do in life. And my dream was because I'm interested in everything. So it's something that there is nothing that I find boring. I follow sports.
Right. You didn't want to be a firefighter or a policeman. You wanted to do everything.
My dream job was going to be somebody calling me on the phone, asking me a question I don't have the answer to, and then me figuring this out. My mother reminds me of that. And this is literally what I'm doing. Consulting, good consulting is exactly that. You ask a tough question, you take time to figure it out, and you hope. So this is something I probably always.
So in a way, actually, even though you couldn't articulate exactly what the profession was that you were going to do, there is something to say for the idea that in a way you have certain interests, even as a child, and that, you know, to be successful and happy in life, it's actually a good idea to follow even those interests that you had as a child.
Now, just to be fair, because I had a lot of questions from my students, consulting is also not bad when you don't have any idea, because, and you are a good example of that. So forget you had no idea, but you can also do a perfectly good career by 2 to 3 years of consulting, opening your eyes and get meeting good people and then move on. I don't want the students to get here that the only way is to leave, it's to join consultant for 25 years and make that a lifetime.
You can also join for 2 years and then become a journalist, like I did.
Have fun.
Now, one of the things I found about consulting was that it was a tough reality. We had to work hard. I mean, like working 60 hours was not an exception. But you told me, you know what, Peter, that's true. But there's also advantages, hidden advantages of working in consulting. What's the hidden advantage of consulting?
So I want to just start by saying, I know the consulting life is tough, and the working hours, especially when you're junior, like you're going to be, is tough. But over time, something people do not appreciate is the incredible flexibility. So let's imagine me at 22 joining Procter & Gamble, a big best CPG company. I would have had, at 47, being in the management team of P&G, to have moved my family 5 times. Most of my kids would have been born in different markets, because the only way you make a career in these companies
is to go from country to country. And it sounds exciting when you're 22, but once you have a family and you have children, you look for some stability, perhaps, possibly.
For me, what made the call is that I met my wife at university. After university, she's a kick-ass bacteriologist. She has a PhD in resistance to antibiotics. She's a doctor. And I never wanted to trade my career against her and her career against mine. So the compromise is we have a dual career. It's based in Brussels. And where consulting is unique is I never had to move. I had to travel quite a bit, but never move.
So that's one of the advantages. And you say, you know what, even with the lens of today, a modern lens, where actually probably you were an exception at the time that you were dual, career household. Today, actually, the norm is that, it doesn't matter whether you're, husband or wife. All of us, I have that too. My wife is probably, not probably, certainly a better professional than I am. And we make decisions, sometimes tough decisions, the one or the other, based on the opportunities that arise. And so one of the advantages you say of consulting is also that, sure, you may have been traveling a lot from week to week, Monday to Friday, but your home base could always be one place. Right. And that allowed, of course, your family, your children, of course, to have a stable childhood. And your wife was able to build a career as a doctor, which, of course, is typically in one hospital or one university hospital.
That's the most important one. My children, I think, would have been okay living in other countries. There is also a plus when you're grown, when you're educated in Brazil or in Indonesia. But for my wife, there was no go, because doctors don't travel, as you know. So.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about the children. I spoke yesterday to the CEO of Sanofi, Paul Hudson, and he said, maybe if I had to do it all again, I'm not so sure I would travel as much as I have, live in so many countries as I have, because my children certainly say, well, we had broken friendships because of that. Yeah. But that's a story for another day, François. One other thing I want to ask you about is, is there something that can make you sort of say no? Have you said no as a consultant to doing certain work? And if so, why?
Well, it's obvious that if you are a consultant working for an organization that is for profit, you can't say no all the time. Sometimes
Right.
you need to say,
Because you're there to serve them, to consult
because
them.
you need to have clients. And I want to just make sure that the people on this WebEx understand that I think that if you look too much like you're judging people, it's going to reduce your impact, because it's better to empathize first and then help.
Can
But
I ask you a side question about it before? And I know I asked you a main question, but does that mean, for example, that as a base attitude, you will, for example, prefer to work, as an example, with an oil and gas company because you can have a bigger change, a bigger impact on getting that kind of a company on track, as opposed to saying, well, I only work with, you know, green companies or companies that have the right values?
If you take the logic of I only work with companies who, and apply the full lenses of what companies do to the world, you end up working with nobody.
Right.
Because you have the carbon, you have the sugar, you have the, and once you look, there are basically a handful, maybe a pharma company that have, it's really, I don't believe in that approach anytime. Now, there are companies, and I can't professionally name them, there are companies I would never work for. But I want to take you up on oil and gas.
Yeah.
I want to take you up on energy companies.
Yes, please.
In all the work I've done in ESG, I discovered something, is that sustainability is the balance between current generations and future generations. It's
okay.
not
I have to, so the balance, ESG is the balance between current generations and future generations.
That's
okay, please.
That's literally the definition of sustainability from 87, because you can't screw up the current livings just to protect the future livings, and you cannot anymore, because we've done too much of that in the 80s and 90s, endanger the future generations because you want to have a life that is unsustainable.
Okay, so bring that back to oil and gas.
The biggest hurdle for people in what we sometimes call emerging markets to get the living standards that we all aspire to is the access to cheap energy.
Right. And they provide that.
And if you don't have companies providing that, there is no way economic development will continue. So does that mean that you need to just do oil? And absolutely not. You need to transfer the portfolio. You need oil and gas company, which are now called energy company, to accelerate the development of renewable energy, which we work a lot on. But just when I hear people say you shouldn't work in energy, it's really, really missing the point that humanity also needs energy. And I would love to, for all of us on this meeting, to turn around and understand what is not made of oil in what surrounds us, and realizing that just saying that oil is bad is very naive.
Right. Now, back to my original question, which is there any work you would say no to? And specifically when you think about values, not activities, but values.
But I can't name names, but in my career, and it's probably once every year, I hear something I don't like, and then I have two levels of intervention. The first one is I debrief the clients, and I
see if you can course correct.
Well, or I express my feelings. I was not comfortable with what you said, etc. And then that's another positives of consultancies. You can just not work anymore with the clients. Right. And so there are clients I've worked with that I'm not prepared to work with anymore because I don't think they were doing the right things. But I need to say, folks, and I know we might talk about greenwashing. Most companies I meet now, you'll be positively surprised. There is greenwashing. There is just trying to do a good job, but it's not easy.
I have two more questions, and I want to open up to the floor. Because the first thing is, I think one of the things you also told me, which I thought was interesting, was when we talked previously, was that, you know, for me, a reason not to work for a company or for an individual is not so much what activity they're engaged in, but rather how they behave as individuals. Tell me a little bit about that. That's a very interesting one.
I don't think you can judge activities as a whole. But the behavior is very important, and there are very...
How we treat people.
No, sorry, just the base is how they treat each other. It's the easiest way. I probably met now 300 companies in my life. The way they speak to each other tells a lot. The way the reports are either hierarchical or not. And then it's very easy, and it will be very easy for students here to understand the ethical standards of company and how they are lived throughout. It's something you pick up as an employee, but you also pick up as a consultant.
Yeah. And it's important to act on, isn't it? Because there's something else that you shared with me, which is that, you know, when you're 22, or at least when you said when you were 22, the way you thought about, you know, which company to work was like, oh, you know, is this an impressive company? Do they have a big, you know, brand name or everything? But then you said, after a while, when you've worked at a few places, you realize that actually what you should look at is not the company and the shiny logo, but rather the kind of people you'll be working with.
But I can share positive examples. I met Mars. I graduated in '98, and I met Mars folks in '99. And
Mars, of course, Mars from the Mars bars, you know, the Mars, the consumer goods company. Yeah.
Mars consumer goods company, global leader in snack food and in pet food. Funny enough, pet care. I met them. It's a family company. Amazing values, folks. If you Google their sites, you see their principles. I think their principles invented 8 years ago completely. And I've just worked with them every year since then because I think their standards are higher than any company. And sorry, just you're going to smile at this, but my dream was not to do 200 projects in pet food, right? That would be my
For some people, it would be. But you ended up doing it regardless because you left the people that you worked with there. And then my final question before we turn over to Twitter, you also shared with me something interesting about making decisions, and very interesting. You said, I try not to make decisions in the moment. I try not to follow my gut. Now, I have to ask you, tell us more about that, because that's interesting.
Well, listen, I'm an extrovert. I'm an impulsive person, and I realized very early on that trusting my immediate instinct in the heat of the moment to make decisions like the one you said, is it an ethical company? Should I stay with the is not very good. And I have two things that I would happily pass on to students here. The first one, I have a set of friends. Some have Bain, some have Bain. Where I have something tricky like that, I share that with them.
Your personal board, you know, for people that you trust, you will consult with them about decisions you have to make.
Me and my friends and colleagues will probably think it's an overstatement to call them a board, but yes, exactly. and usually, like always, I get to a better advice than if I had followed my instinct. The second one is I run. And I told you that.
Run, right? Do you run through the forest? You go for a run.
Yeah, I run. And I'm sure we all have something that profoundly annoys us at the moment, whatever.
I know. And then
after the run, most of the time it's gone.
Yeah, it's really amazing advice. François, I want to turn now to students, because we've got a few students waiting in the wings to ask you questions as well. Actually, a lot of questions about ESG, which is good, because that's what you do and what you're here to talk about. And I want to start with Joaquin. Joaquin is from Ecuador. He's actually studying on the digital campus, which is fantastic because this is a digital event. And he's doing a bachelor in international relations. Joaquin, what's your question for François?
Well, hi, François. Thank you so much for being a part of this webinar. It's amazing getting to know you. As the head of the ESG division in a leading global management consulting firm, could you please share with me some of your key strategies, initiatives for promoting sustainable business practices and addressing environmental, social, and governance challenges in the corporate sector?
Well, I'll start. Thank you for the question. So I told you my job is to develop bespoke solutions for clients. We can talk about that more, but you have a sense that the biggest problem now that clients express is climate and carbon. We develop AI technology that allows you to model and optimize, but we also have good old tools where we need to help people deploy within big corporations. The second one is embedding that into everything we do. The biggest thing we do at Bain is strategy. And so now in the strategy plans we write, there is a strong dimension of ESG. And the last one, which is, I think, the part I'm most excited about, is we send everybody back to school. So what does that mean? We have 15,000 employees, and I realized that most of us didn't have any ESG course. Even 5 years ago at Harvard, right. You'll not be happy.
Very rare.
And so we have made deals with university all over the world to specific by country, because I wanted that to be a local choice. And folks in cohorts go back to university, and we do 20 to 30 hours of this. And what I hope we do, Joachim, is that the biggest impact will be that I will convince individual Bainese, some of them your age, some of them my age, that it's very pivotal to include that in the way they think about their impact. My biggest secret weapon is I want 15,000 people to reinvent the way they think about value. If that's done, I think it will be phenomenal.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And in fact, we had a follow-up question from Gail Gibson on that topic, because earlier you talked about sort of the three levers, right? You talked about industry or innovation, you talked about policy regulation, and you talked about individual behavior. And she asks, if you think about it from a Bain point of view, what is actually the top priority? What's the most important lever of those three? Is it then indeed, for you personally, you said, your personal interest is in changing those 15,000 individuals. Is that true for Bain as well? Or do you think it has more impact, for example, on industry?
No, I think for Bain overall, you have to prioritize the impact of it on industry. We need, and we do that client by client, but we also need, we do that by sponsoring what we call coalition. I want to just answer this question by taking a little poll. Some of these solutions can be figured out by company individually and sometimes drive competitive advantage. Sometimes there is no solution and companies need to define new norms working with their own competitors. What Bain does well is we put them together and we work in coalition. The best ones we have are in the food transition space. A lot of
so that basically, Nestle, P&G, Mars, Unilever, they all come together and say we're going to do something about packaging, or we're going to do something about sourcing of our natural resources, because together they have that market power to really move the needle that individually they don't.
And it's very new because it's called the pre-competitive space. So companies who are used to compete day in, day out need to decide that this particular issue will not be competing. Nobody will win.
Right.
Everybody will work together. This is very new. There are very few examples in the history of businesses where it's done.
So that's one in the consumer goods space that's happening now. And it's a good thing, right?
Well, just in consumer goods, you have 20 because you have deforestation, you have regenerative agriculture, there's very specific issues around dairy. I hope you realize here that 1 billion people depend on dairy for their living.
Wow, that's a lot. No, I didn't realize that.
But dairy and meat is responsible for 25% of emissions because of methane. Right. So you need to.
So again, that link between E, S, and G, right? Like between the environment and the social, and you can't, just work on one because then basically you're going to hurt the other. Another follow-up question from Michael Yao. He's from Hong Kong, residing in Shenzhen, which I suppose is across the river from Hong Kong. In his third year at EU, and he says, what about China? What do you see in terms of ESG progress or the future of ESG in China?
I'm not an expert in ESG in China, but what I pick up from the Chinese government is that they have an energy question. For China to access, for parts of China to access the level of development in what I think is called Tier 1 city, you need way more energy. And at the moment, I think China is a little forced to bump up the coal. And so there is an energy balance in China that is very present. Now, China has been confronted as well with pollutions in a way that even in the West has not happened yet. Sometimes Beijing is closed because of pollution. So what I see from where I stand, there is a very ambitious ESG agenda in China. because they are confronted here and now with pollution.
With the consequences.
Oh yeah. And of course, they came at it later than Europe, but they are catching up. And you probably know, all of you, that they are by far the largest manufacturers or some of the technologies that we need to pivot. For example, solar panels are, the share of Chinese panels is spectacular.
The majority is made there. I want to bring in our second student, Tuan. Tuan is actually from Vietnam. Hello, Tuan. And he's doing a bachelor in sports management. But nevertheless, Tuan, you have also a question about ESG.
Yeah, hello, Mr. François. First, I really appreciate you to share with us your experience and stories. I have a question. So in your opinions, what do companies find most challenging when applying ESG, and what is preventing further uptake by big corporations?
There are many challenges, but the couple of ones I think you'll be interested to hear about is one that you'll see the minute you get a job in a big corporation, is that there is a very big difference between what the board says or the CEO says and what really happens. Because the work happens through what you could call the front line, the people who meet customer, the people who touch the product, the people who are in the factory. Actually, the CEO doesn't do much. She or he tries to impulse change. And why am I saying that? Is one of the hardest things is that CEOs and boards are convinced. But once you get to a general manager or a person with a profit and loss account, this big dream of sustainability, if it hurts the short-term delivery of finance, and if all the incentive system of the person are geared to short-term delivery, this person will feel cornered. We call this taxed and told, because it's costing more money. I'm told from the top I need to do this, but I have no way to meet my objectives or get promoted if I do this. This is, in large corporations, the first problem, is that the young people that come in are all convinced. The board and the CEO are all convinced. But in the middle, you have people who run businesses and who have not been told how you make the trade-offs. That's certainly the number one things I hear. Sorry, is it solvable? Absolutely. But in 80% of the companies I work with, it's a problem.
So again, that sort of balance between, previously you called the current generation, the future generation. You can also say short-term, quarterly interests and long-term interests. It's something that people have to manage, of course, and balance, which is not easy in public companies, which are often driven by quarterly reports. It's fascinating. I want to bring in also Daniela. Daniela from Namibia, which François told us earlier on is his favorite place on earth. So, already kudos to you, Daniela, but you're in Barcelona and you're doing a BA in digital business design and innovation.
Yes.
And now comes the big question. Are you ready for it, François?
Hi, François. Once again, it's so lovely to have this opportunity with you. So you started mentioning corporate greenwashing, and I wanted to know if you could go into a little bit of more depth on this topic. Like, how do you prevent this, ensure that companies are held accountable for their actions?
Well, this is probably one of the questions I get the most, because I know there is a lot of things written about greenwashing. I had a peek at the insights, not of every company in the world, but at a fair amount. And I've seen very little of it, candidly, because I think that CEOs, some of them by personal values, some of them forced by other stakeholders, really consider this part of their legacy. This is what changed, is that currently a CEO of 50, 55, 60, 65-year-old knows that if they don't do something there, people will look back at their tenure and consider it a failure. They know this. The problem is that the intent is there, the delivery is very difficult.
Right.
But I see a very big disconnect between the pretended greenwashing that the outside says and what I see in the inside. That being said, as a citizen, I feel that we are exactly in the right direction, that regardless of my opinion about the CEOs I work with, there are no pressure points from everywhere, Daniela, that will make sure this will go away. The governments, the NGOs, the investors, not all of them, some of them and more importantly, you, the employees. The sniff test of a 23-year-old, whatever is the average age here, coming into a company, seeing the commitments from the boardroom, and feeling that nothing in the front line is in line, these companies will lose the talents like you, and a company with no good talent is toast. Toast.
Not in a good way. Toast that we don't like.
Toast in a good way. So I think that the days of getting away with any type of greenwashing are counted.
They're gone. You know, I heard this very interesting new term, François. Hopefully you're going to like this. It's green wishing. It's companies who truly want to do the right thing, but they're not able to.
So, Peter, you're exceptional at finding words like that. Greenwashing, I see very little. Green wishing, I see a lot.
Let's make sure that we're not about wishing, but about doing. I've got some more questions because people are really, really interested in this topic.
You look surprised, Peter.
No, I'm totally with them. And I'll start with Caroline Grolli. She's from Brazil, is currently studying in Munich. And she says, how do you feel about professionals that have an established career path? She's actually doing an MBA, so I suppose she has an established career path, but who would like to consider to change careers for ESG. And what do you recommend? I feel like you're going to be a good person to answer that question because you had an established career path and you switched over to ESG.
The point I would make is, what does that mean to switch in ESG? Because I could feel, I know, not feel. I know there are lots of career paths that in the past you would call purchaser, for example, that now include a massive dose of ESG. So I know people are building systems now, tech systems, to monitor the carbon capture of some soils. And so I do believe there is more future into doing ESG within a function with power and business impact than necessarily finding the secret, my job, which is a chief sustainability officer or responsible for ESG. I think there are lots of opportunities to marry what you have done pre-MBA, what you can do, your muscle memory, if you want, and ESG. I don't think it's necessarily a 180 degree, it's a 90 degree.
I see, that's interesting. Not a 180, but a 90 degree. Another question, this is from Oana. It's a pretty critical question, I would say. Bradak Oana Maria, and she says, I come from Romania, I live in Switzerland. My question for you is this: isn't the real problem that companies are geared towards creating excessive waste? Isn't the problem that they're always trying to make us consume more to get more profit? And that the problem would be a lot smaller if we consumed less?
Oh, it's a fantastic question. So I'll go first conceptual and then I'll talk about purpose. If we don't find a way to decorrelate economic growth and the production of waste, economic growth will stop. It's very easy. You've all seen at school the input manufacturing output, a linear process, and waste as an afterthought. This would not work. Why? Because we are exponentially consuming everything, and at some point there will be nothing more to consume. So this is why one of the ways to decorrelate that is the circular economy, and there are many industries where we try to reuse, repurpose, etc.
And do you see it happen? Is it possible?
It's
the circular model, circular economy model.
I hear you. The circular model is not yet possible everywhere, but if you look in packaging, if you look in fashion, if you look in many things, this is highly possible. It's
packaging, including plastic, or are you talking about?
No. You will see in a short number of years returnable PET bottles by the largest corporations to just reuse that. Glass was reused 20, 30 times. It could be higher in PET. I'm convinced. Sorry, I know, because it's in the plans.
Right.
Now, the other points is, I think we will see that some way you advertise, like you should eat more, consume more, etc., will also be critically citizens, consumers will stop that. But there are many companies that by doing more of what they do, improve the world and don't create more everything. So
Waste, yeah.
when you look at a company's purpose, you need to look at, is you doing more of your business better for humanity or worse for humanity? And you'll see both.
Right. So that makes sense. And by the way, I spoke to some companies, like, for example, a mining company, Sibelco, you may know them from Belgium. They said that actually, in terms of glass, pretty much the circular economy is there. That you can basically 100% recycle glass, and that's possible. So there is hope, and I agree with you on that. Final question, perhaps on ESG, from John Agbo. John says, you talked about this idea of, we have to provide cheap energy. That's really, a normal need of people all over the world, including in some of the emerging markets. But we also have to work on ESG. How do you balance those? Realistically, how do you do that? Does it constitute a hurdle in your work, or can you overcome that hurdle?
No, it's sorry, after years and years of reading, I think this is the biggest question I've found, is that we need more energy for a lot more people, otherwise economic development will stop. If you go too fast into switching to renewables, the price of energy, for example, in the US, will go at a stage where consumer will find it unacceptable, and where you're looking at massive changes in the political spectrum, riots, etc. So this balancing will be very important. My guess is that there will not be a global answer. It will be a country by country, state by state answer. For example, Austria, if there is an Austrian here, don't have that problem. It's hydroelectricity 100%. They can do whatever.
We're in Switzerland, so some of us are in Switzerland. We've got hydro.
You can't hydro 100%, but it's a good one. But this is becoming one of the top 3 questions for any nations, and it was not 30 years ago. I don't know if you know here, we are post-peak oil. It means that there is less oil now. So regardless of what we do with oil, there will be an end to oil in a few decades. We need to figure out a way to change the energy fast enough to compensate climate change, but not too fast that we will make this unaffordable for people and we will break the economic growth. Are we going to succeed in that? I think it's going to be tough. And this is where I sincerely hope that what was announced on fusion recently will materialize at some point. The math I've seen without some breakthroughs in energy are not very convincing.
Right. Fusion, of course, you were referring to fusion nuclear energy, the German startup that showed that it may be possible. Finally, some questions, François, on career consulting. You have made a credible case. We're all on board. We want to become consultants. What are you looking for when, what are the main characteristics that anyone needs to succeed as a consultant?
Well, I think that I would advise people who have these questions to go online, because there are many points of views on that, and I'm just offering mine. But I think I will not avoid the question. I think first, you need curiosity and empathy, because if you need to be able to put all hands on deck to solve whatever problems you're being asked, and it takes curiosity, it takes empathy. The second one is you need a sort of analytical mind, and I don't worry about people here, because I think that you are
right
in the schools, but you need a way to quickly dissect the problem. And you know this, Peter, because you've done that job. And this is something that is partially trainable, but partially has some elements of personal quality. And the last one, if you ever wanted to prepare an interview for consulting firms, etc., just make sure you have a couple of things to say that make people trust that you are exceptional, creative, unique, and fun.
Stand out.
Yeah, but it's standing out also in a personal way, because I see too many CVs where it looks like you've done what you thought was important and never did something fun for yourself. And the people who convince you the most are the people who follow their passion.
That's interesting. I'll ask my final question, but first one from Ban Arudani, also from consulting. Starting consulting or do something else and then do consulting? What will you say?
Both work. I think there is a short-term upside in starting in consulting is the learning curve is extraordinary, and there is nothing that beats that. The downside is that when you're asked, then, as you know, Peter, we start with being consultants, and then we have to be team managers. When I was asked to be a team manager, I was very young and I had no real work experience. I realized that the people who had worked 4 or 5 years before and then maybe done an MBA had more skills when it comes to human and management.
Right.
So I can prove that to you with data. At the end, the born consultants go faster at the beginning, but then the people who have work experience compensate when they have to.
Right.
I was at first terrible at that.
But you clearly overcame that. Finally, you know, I think we also want to know if you were again 22, right, which is the average age, I think, of the bachelor students here and the master students, what were some things that you would advise, you know, to yourself? I mean, like, knowing, of course, everything that you had, what's 3 pieces of advice that you would give to yourself at 22, but perhaps also, of course, to our students who are now 22?
I would say the first one is the one I just left you with, is do what you really are passionate for, even if that doesn't fit with what the nerds in your class do. And I have done some of that, and I should have done more of that.
What would François have done if he fully followed his passion? You would have been a trail runner? You would have been...
No. So I'm a trail runner, a very slow runner. By the way, if you see me run, don't say I'm walking, say I'm running. But I go longer and longer distance now. But I think that I need too much finance, for example, and I should have taken classes in biology, etc. I think I was more interested in other things, but I felt I had to do some extra finance. I studied options and speculative markets. This is retrospective, gigantic.
Right. And of course, if you do, that's sort of the idea of, like, you know, do the calligraphy course, you know, and you'll become the founder of Apple kind of perspective.
And this is important because you have the right to, and you have access to fantastic knowledge. The second one, and this is the last one, is be nice to your parents.
Oh, yeah.
And to your family in general. They don't last. It is important.
And do you have a third tip, or that's it? 2 tips.
Well, I think this is I'm not big on live lessons, but I would maybe the last one is it still works like a charm. Smile more. It's
right.
not that bad. Smile.
That's amazing, François. I couldn't think of a better way to end this session. And I have to say, you know, spending an hour with you, even I want to return to consulting now. I want to, you know, I want to come back and work for you. I forgot about everything. We really appreciate having spent this hour with you. I think both for the really good technical insights into what is ESG, how can it improve business and the world ultimately, but also in these more philosophical and practical and personal pieces of advice about, you know, how can you live a good life. And of course, we've remembered, be nice to our parents, smile, and follow your passions so that you can include them later on in your career. This is really amazing. Thank you from me, thank you from us, from all of us, François. And I want to leave you with some final words from our managing director. Of course, Luc. He's over here in Geneva on the other side of the lake. Over to you, Luc.
Thank you very much, Peter. François, I cannot think of a better session to close our Learning from Leaders series. Thank you very much for all the insight. Take care of your family. That's really important. That's something I adhere to fully, and everything goes way better with a smile, obviously. For us, for our viewers, I think we're going to be back with the Learning of Leaders as of mid-September, with some great names that have already been lined up. So stay tuned on that. And enjoy the summer to everybody and enjoy the weekend. Thank you very much.
Have a great summer. Have a great weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Cheers.
François. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.